19 Filipino mythical creatures that get worse the longer you think about them. There's a creature in Philippine folklore that clicks at night. Tick, tick, tick. And if you grow up hearing this story, you learn one very important rule. If the clicking is loud, you're fine. It's far away. It's when the sound goes quiet that you should start worrying. Quiet means it's close, really close. Quiet means it may already be on your roof. That's not just a monster that hunts you, that's a monster that figured out how your ears work and decided to use them against you. I read that detail a while ago, and I genuinely haven't stopped thinking about it since, which is basically how this video started. I'd heard the Philippines had this unbelievably deep folklore tradition. Thousands of islands, hundreds of languages, stories that can mutate every 50 kilometers, and I thought, great, let's build a bestiary, weird creatures, spooky music, done in a weekend. That is not what happened, because once I started reading these myths and really getting into the research, I stopped being entertained and started getting genuinely unsettled. And not by the monsters, by what was underneath them, because there's a creature that can copy your son, move into your house, eat dinner with your family for weeks, and meanwhile, the real one may still be out in the forest, alive, waiting for somebody to notice he never actually came home. There's another monster whose entire hunting strategy is pretending to be a crying baby, which means the people it catches are the exact people decent enough to go help. There's one that supposedly ate 6 of the 7 moons that once filled the sky. There's a town in Negros where, in 2008, police and local officials were dealing with reports of a hairy ape-like thing attacking animals and allegedly injuring people. And then there's the part I absolutely was not expecting. In the early 1950s, an American intelligence officer looked at Filipino belief in the Aswang and apparently thought, I can use that. And according to his own account, he did, and it worked. We'll get there, because that may be the wildest detour in this entire video. So, 19 creatures, and we're working inward. We start on the road at night with things that live in trees and wait outside villages. Then they get closer, into your curiosity, your kindness, your sleep, your house. Eventually, one of them is sitting at your dinner table wearing the face of somebody you love. Then we go all the way out the other side to creatures large enough to eat the moon. One of them also steals women's underwear off clotheslines. I have no good explanation for that one. Neither does the folklore. I do have suspicions. Let's get right to the point. We're starting with the place everybody eventually has to cross. The road. Act 1. The road. Everything in this first stretch lives outside. Forest, path, old tree, open ground. These are the things you meet when you're walking somewhere after dark. And at first, the rules seem simple. Stay respectful, stay alert, and don't assume you're alone just because you can't see anybody. Number 19, the Bungisngis, the giant who won't stop laughing. This one comes from central Luzon. The name Bungisngis is connected to ngisi, to grin or giggle, which makes sense, because this thing laughs at everything. I mean everything. It laughs while wandering through the forest. It laughs while wrestling animals. It's probably laughing right now, somewhere in the trees, at a joke nobody actually told. But perhaps the funniest thing about the Bungisngis isn't the laughter. It's what happens to its face while it's doing it. Picture a giant with one enormous eye, huge teeth, 2 long tusks rising from the lower jaw, and an upper lip so ridiculously large that when it throws its head back laughing, the lip can flap up and cover its own eye. It literally blinds itself every time it cracks up, which would be adorable if the rest of the creature wasn't built like a wrecking ball. Because don't let the giggling fool you. The Bungisngis is often portrayed as an ogre, like Predator, with absurd physical strength. Some stories describe it grabbing a full-grown carabao and slamming the animal into the ground so hard that its legs sink into the earth up to the knees. Against a human, you are not winning a strength contest. You're barely participating in one. Some stories also treat those huge lower tusks as weapons built for tearing through heavy prey, and because the creature only has one eye, certain tellings compensate by giving it unusually sharp hearing. So sneaking past one isn't necessarily your way out either. Fortunately, the Bungisngis has one enormous weakness. It is catastrophically gullible. In story after story, ordinary people don't defeat it with enchanted swords or sacred weapons. They lie to it, confidently, right to its face. The giant can be strong enough to uproot a tree and still believe a stranger who walks up with a suspiciously convenient explanation for why the sky is about to collapse. Some stories involve distracting the creature with gifts. Others are basically the Chicken Little strategy, convince the Bungisngis that some huge disaster is coming, and it may panic badly enough to let itself be tied to a tree or trapped somewhere for its own protection. There are even tales where the creature's panic leaves it trapped in a well or bound so tightly that the supposedly helpless human can simply walk away, which means you can potentially survive this thing by being a better storyteller than it is. Kicking off a monster list with a creature you can defeat by talking is a choice. Enjoy it. The rest of these things are not going to be this cooperative. Number 18, the Pugot, the Headless One. Northern Luzon, Ilocano country. You're walking past a tamarind tree at night when you notice something moving in the branches. Big, roughly human-shaped, climbing much faster than a person should be able to climb. Then you notice the neck. The Pugot, from a word meaning beheaded or decapitated, is often described as a towering, shadow-black creature with an open stump where its head should be. It shapeshifts. A dog, a pig, sometimes a human figure. But the headless form is the one people remember. And according to some versions, the way it eats is exactly as horrible as you'd imagine. It pushes food directly into the neck opening. Insects, snakes, small animals, raw chicken, raw meat, straight in. Now here's the strange part. For something built like a walking crime scene, the Pugot is often described as more disturbing than openly murderous. It lurks, it changes shape, it scares travelers, and then there's its most infamous habit, stealing women's underwear from outdoor clotheslines. That's it. A 12-foot headless shapeshifter descends from a haunted tree, walks past an entire sleeping household, ignores everything valuable inside, and leaves with laundry. The stories offer no satisfying explanation. I looked. You can find attempts. Some traditions around prankster spirits suggest they're attracted to human scent, body heat, or belongings carrying traces of a person. Why underwear specifically? That part remains between the Pugo and whatever supernatural lawyer is representing it. Although, I have to say, if underwear started disappearing in a village where everyone already believed in a headless shapeshifter, that is an unbelievably convenient excuse for at least one completely normal human being. It wasn't me. It was the 12-foot entity in the tamarind tree. Case closed, but underneath the bizarre comedy, the Pugot has darker layers. Older traditions connect headless beings with nocturnal forest spirits and, in some interpretations, dishonored or violently killed dead. Some accounts even connect that headless imagery with memories of decapitated enemies and older regional headhunting traditions. As the Philippines passed through Spanish colonial rule and centuries of Catholic influence, later stories increasingly featured headless priests wandering near churches, balete trees, graveyards, or isolated roads. That changing image matters because folklore absorbs history. A spirit doesn't necessarily remain frozen for 500 years. It picks up new clothes, new locations, new enemies, new reasons to haunt people. Some Pugo stories make that instability literal. A sighting may begin as a black cat with glowing eyes, then become a huge dog, then a towering headless man. Then, a floating ball of fire. The creature keeps changing because the story keeps changing. Some stories even describe appeasing one with raw meat or blood, which is probably a much more sensible option than trying to negotiate after it has already turned into the headless man. And that ability for a creature to absorb whatever history throws at it is going to become a pattern. Number 17, the Anggitay, the one who only shows up in weird weather. The sun is out, it's raining anyway. Everything glows. The rain looks like gold dust. Water steams off the road. For a few minutes, the weather looks like it can't decide which world it belongs to. A sun shower, sometimes called ulan sa araw, and sun showers in the Philippines already carry folklore of their own. In some traditions, people say a Tikbalang is getting married, which immediately raises an obvious question. Married to what? Enter the Anggitay. She's usually described as a female centaur-like being, woman above the waist, horse below. Some depictions give her a single pale, almost alabaster horn rising from the forehead, basically the product of a centaur and a unicorn that somehow lived happily ever after. She's associated with glittering objects, gemstones, and those strange moments when bright sunlight and rain overlap. And unlike many creatures in this video, she's not remembered because she wants to tear you apart. You remember the Anggitay because of the world around her. You don't see one on a completely ordinary afternoon. You see one when reality already looks wrong. That's the underlying rule in a surprising amount of Philippine folklore. Strange weather isn't just weather. A twisted trail isn't just a trail. A hollow tree isn't just wood. They're cracks. Small moments where the normal world seems to loosen just enough for something else to lean through. The Anggitay isn't really a predator, she's a signal. When reality briefly looks unfamiliar, pay attention, because the next creature doesn't even need strange weather. It just needs an old tree. Number 16, the Kapre, the thing smoking in the branches. It's midnight. Nobody around for 100 meters, just one huge old balete tree. And suddenly, you smell tobacco. Heavy, rich, fresh smoke. You look around at eye level. That's the mistake. Because according to the stories, the Kapre isn't standing beside the tree. It's sitting inside it, 9 feet of shifting shadow high in the canopy, staring down at you with a cigar the size of your forearm. Sometimes the glowing ember is the first thing people supposedly notice. Just one tiny orange-red light floating high in the branches where there should be absolutely nothing. The Kapre is one of the Philippines' most recognizable tree spirits. It's commonly described as enormous, dark, human-like, and closely connected with ancient trees. Balete, mango, old trees with sprawling roots and enough age behind them to make people hesitate before touching them. When a kapre sits in a tree, it doesn't perch like a bird. It folds itself into the branches, knees pulled toward the chest, long limbs hanging through the leaves, smoking, watching. Some tellings even describe it holding the cigar backward, as though normal human habits only mostly apply. In some regional stories, the creature becomes romantically attached to humans. A kapre may follow a woman from the trees or leave behind strange, heavy gold jewelry as a courting gift. Accepting that gift can bind you to the spirit, which is a terrible way to discover your secret admirer lives 30 feet above the ground and weighs approximately as much as a refrigerator. But most kapres aren't trying to kill you. They're trying to confuse you. You leave the path. You pass the same crooked trunk again. Then again, then again. The forest seems to fold in on itself. A trail you've walked many times suddenly refuses to behave like the same trail, and now you're doing the mental math. How long until sunrise? How far did I actually walk? Was that tree there before? Then the history gets genuinely strange. Tobacco isn't indigenous to the Philippines. It reached the islands through Spanish colonial trade, including the Manila-Acapulco galleon network, beginning in the late 1500s, which means the famous cigar-smoking kapre could not always have looked exactly the way people describe it now. Something changed. Some scholars and folklorists argue that colonial influence reshaped older forest spirit traditions, blending indigenous beliefs with Spanish-era imagery and social pressure. There are even interpretations suggesting colonial religious authorities encouraged frightening stories about beings outside settled areas because Spanish rule often sought to concentrate scattered communities around church-centered towns. That should be treated as an interpretation, not one universally proven origin story. Nobody found the memo where a friar wrote, "Step 1, invent giant cigar demon." But the larger point holds. The kapre we know today carries fingerprints from different eras, and the belief didn't disappear when the colonial era ended. Even now, stories circulate about construction crews hesitating to cut old balete or mango trees. Road widening projects may pause while workers perform a permission ritual. People tell stories of chainsaws suddenly breaking, tractors stalling, workers falling sick after ignoring warnings about a particular tree. In places such as Laguna, Quezon, and Rizal, stories about development colliding with an old spirit tree continue to circulate. Search and rescue stories from places like Mount Makiling or Mount Banahaw sometimes pick up kapre language when experienced hikers get turned around or report heavy footsteps and tobacco smoke far from any settlement. None of that proves a supernatural giant lives in a tree. Machinery breaks, people get sick, hikers get lost, branches snap, smoke travels strangely through humid air. But that's exactly why the kapre survives. Every ingredient already exists. The tree is real, the darkness is real, the smell is real, the confusion is real. Folklore only has to put a face in the branches. And there's a brutal little rule buried underneath all of it. The oldest tree was here first, and it does not care about your property line. Number 15. The Nuno sa Punso say "excuse me" to the dirt. There's a phrase people still say in the Philippines, not necessarily as a joke, as a habit. Tabi tabi po. Roughly, "excuse me, please let me pass." You might say it while walking through tall grass, an overgrown lot, past an anthill, across a patch of ground where nobody appears to be standing, and you're not necessarily speaking to another person. The Nuno sa Punso is often imagined as a tiny elderly being living inside an anthill, termite mound, or small rise in the earth. Nuno means something like ancestor, elder, or old one. Punso refers to the mound. So you're basically dealing with the old one who lives in the dirt, and you are expected to have manners. Kick the mound, step on it, damage it, urinate too close, and according to folklore, the response can arrive later. A limb swells, a fever appears, a strange pain won't leave, a child gets a rash, nobody in the family knows how to explain. That's where a traditional healer, an albulario, or sometimes a megtatawas may enter the story. The explanation isn't simply, "you got sick," it's, "you offended something," and the illness is the reply. And the Nuno isn't really an isolated creature. It belongs to a much bigger supernatural landscape populated by Encanto and other nature spirits associated with trees, rivers, caves, hills, rocks, and places humans didn't build. Which changes tabi tabi po a little. You aren't necessarily apologizing to one tiny old man. You're announcing yourself to an invisible neighborhood. Now, it would be very easy to file tabi tabi po under quaint superstition and move on, but that misses what the custom is doing. Watch where you step. Something may have been here first. Don't walk through the world like it's an empty room. That's the instruction. And belief in these spirits still creates real behavior. In local stories about Philippine construction, dealing with a punso can become a very literal logistical headache. Accounts from places including Rizal, Cavite, and Batangas describe workers reluctant to flatten old mounds or disturb certain patches of land until somebody performs a permission or appeasement ritual. Sometimes a healer is called, sometimes the spirit is politely asked to leave. People tell anecdotes about bulldozers failing after striking a mound, workers becoming sick. Projects stopping after somebody ignores a warning. Again, those are cultural reports and stories, not evidence that a tiny supernatural man sabotaged the transmission. But folklore isn't only about what physically happened, it's about how people interpret what happened. A machine breaks after you ignored the warning. Now, it isn't just bad luck, it's a response. The illnesses linked to these stories are interesting too. People may develop swelling, skin infections, bites, fevers, or painful reactions after walking through brush or disturbing earth. Modern explanations can include insects, bacteria, fungi, allergic reactions, or ordinary infection. But for generations, communities have also used words like namaligno to describe being afflicted after offending a spirit. Same physical event, completely different story wrapped around it. And there's an even stranger side road here involving wild mushrooms in the Cordillera Highlands. Some local accounts describe mushroom intoxication involving visions of tiny human-like figures. Similar reports exist around certain mushrooms in other parts of Asia, including Yunnan in China. The exact species, genetics, chemistry, and viral claims around these mushrooms are complicated. You'll find dramatic claims that specific Philippine mushrooms are identical to Chinese species, or that they force extremely precise little people hallucinations through some mysterious biochemical mechanism. I would not treat every version of that as settled science, but culturally, the overlap is fascinating. Imagine living in a place where people already believe tiny beings occupy the forest. Then someone eats the wrong mushroom, goes home, and starts seeing tiny figures moving across the room. You really don't need much help from imagination after that. Is that actually where Nuno's stories came from? We have no reason to claim that. The folklore is far bigger than one mushroom, but it shows how culture and sensory experience can reinforce each other. You see something impossible, your culture already has a name waiting for it, and suddenly, the impossible feels familiar. Number 14, the Tikbalang, the path that won't end. You've been walking for 20 minutes, then you pass the same bent tree again. You stop, turn around, walk back. 5 minutes later, there it is. Same trunk, same broken branch, same patch of mud. You're not moving through the forest anymore. The forest is moving you. This is where the Tikbalang lives. The Tikbalang is one of the most recognizable beings in Philippine folklore. Horse's head, hooves, a long, stretched human-like body. So tall and strangely proportioned that some descriptions say, when it crouches, its knees rise above its head. And unlike the Bungisngis, a Tikbalang doesn't necessarily need to touch you. It attacks direction. Paths loop, landmarks repeat. The road home keeps bringing you back to the place you started. Some stories describe travelers who can literally see the lights of their village across a valley. They keep walking toward home, but somehow the lights seem farther away. Then they're back at the same tree, again and again. Modern rural stories preserve the exact same structure. A hiker knows the trail, a motorcycle rider knows the road, a farmer has crossed the same patch of land 100 times. Then one night, the familiar route simply stops behaving. 10 minutes becomes hours. The destination stays visible, but never gets closer. The traditional solution is one of my favorite things in folklore anywhere. Turn your shirt inside out. That's it. That breaks it. You've been caught in a supernatural spatial trap. Flip the shirt. The logic is symbolic reversal. The creature turned the world wrong, so you turn something else wrong and cancel it. It's basically a hard reset for reality. This inside-out clothing trick appears in several Filipino supernatural traditions. Sometimes the idea is that you confuse the spirit. Sometimes you become harder for it to recognize. Sometimes reversing your clothes symbolically reverses the enchantment itself. Some modern explanations get even more elaborate and describe it almost like confusing the spirit's map or changing the coordinates it thinks you occupy. That language is obviously modern, but the older logic underneath it is simple. The world has been reversed. Reverse yourself. Whatever the explanation, shirts are doing an unbelievable amount of supernatural heavy lifting in this country. There's also another tradition where you can tame a Tikbalang by climbing onto its back and ripping 3 golden hairs from its mane. If you survive that, the creature may become bound to you as a supernatural protector, which sounds impressive. But compared with flipping your shirt inside out, it also feels like an unnecessarily ambitious afternoon. And the Tikbalang survives because the real-world experience underneath it still happens. People get lost in places they know. Hikers walk in circles. Motorcycle riders take familiar roads and somehow end up somewhere they don't recognize. Farmers swear they walked straight for 10 minutes and came out hours later far from where they expected. Mountainous terrain, dense vegetation, darkness, exhaustion, weather, and panic can destroy your sense of direction much faster than most people realize. Folklore gives that disorientation a personality. The path isn't confusing. Something is confusing you, and that's worse. Because you can study a map, it's much harder to argue with a creature that keeps moving the road. Notice what everything so far has in common. These monsters are environmental, old trees, strange paths. Weird weather, places where you can still tell yourself, fine, I just won't go there. The next group is different. They don't only wait in dangerous places, they exploit something inside you. Curiosity, kindness, envy, greed, the instinct to help, the instinct to grab an opportunity before somebody else does. The trap starts working before you even know you're inside it. Act 2, the bait. Number 13, the Santelmo. Don't follow the light. Picture this. A ball of fire floating a meter above the ground, no torch, nobody holding it, no visible fuel, just a bright flame drifting through the dark. That's the Santelmo. Its name is connected to Saint Elmo and the real atmospheric phenomenon known as Saint Elmo's fire. The electrical glow sailors have reported around masts and other pointed objects during intense atmospheric conditions. But Philippine folklore turns the wandering light into something personal. Maybe it's somebody who drowned, someone who died violently, someone who never received a proper burial. Seeing it isn't necessarily the problem. Following it is. The Santelmo hangs just far enough ahead to stay interesting. You take a few steps, it moves, you follow, it drifts farther, the road disappears behind you, the ground gets softer, the slope beside you gets steeper, and the light keeps floating forward like it already knows exactly where you're going to put your foot wrong. It's almost like chasing the end of a rainbow, always visible, never reachable, except this rainbow may be leading you into a swamp. That's what makes the Santelmo such a good trap. It never has to chase you, you chase it. Curiosity does the work. Some regional stories make the flame even stranger. It can split into multiple lights, surround a traveler, change shape. Some accounts even describe the outline of a screaming face trapped inside the fire. You're also sometimes warned not to point at it. Not because pointing is rude, because pointing can be treated like an invitation. The flame rushes toward you, or the finger you pointed with swells, burns, or hurts afterward. If you realize you're being led toward a swamp, cliff, riverbank, or deep brush, some traditions recommend a physical interruption. Bite your thumb, turn your clothing inside out, do something deliberate enough to snap yourself out of the fixation. Stories about floating lights have circulated around marshes, rice fields, coastal areas, and river country in places such as Luzon and Mindoro, and the belief has deep enough roots that older written accounts of Philippine supernatural life also describe communities frightened by mysterious lights moving through the night. There are real phenomena that probably helped stories like this survive. Wetlands can produce strange gases. Electrical effects create glowing lights. Lanterns and distant fires can move unpredictably at night. Perspective can make a light appear to retreat whenever you approach. But reducing the entire Santelmo to swamp gas misses the more interesting point, because the warning isn't really about chemistry, it's about you. Not everything shining in the darkness wants to guide you home. Sometimes the fact that you desperately want to know what it is exactly what makes it dangerous. Number 12, the White Lady of Balete Drive. Check the mirror. You're driving late at night through Quezon City. You turn onto Balete Drive. The road is choked in darkness. Old Balete trees interlock above the street, breaking apart the moonlight and swallowing pieces of the street lamps. Then you see her, a woman in white standing on the shoulder. Sometimes she flags the car down. Sometimes she just stands there, completely motionless, staring through the windshield as you pass. You keep driving. Your eyes drift toward the rearview mirror, and she's already in the back seat. In some versions, her face is pale. In others, it's ruined, blood-soaked, damaged, wrong. And you have absolutely no idea when she got into the car. The White Lady of Balete Drive is one of the most famous urban legends in the Philippines. Taxi drivers and late-night motorists have been trading versions of the story for decades. The legend became especially well-known in Manila during the middle of the 20th century, with versions circulating widely by the 1950s. But the origin never stays still. Did she die in a car wreck? Was she murdered, assaulted, and dumped nearby? A student walking home? There's a version for almost every retelling. And that unstable history may be exactly why the legend survived. A completely explained ghost eventually becomes a sad historical story. An unexplained ghost stays blank. Every generation can add something. Every driver gets a slightly different woman. Every empty back seat becomes suspicious. Vanishing hitchhiker stories exist all over the world, but Balete Drive has one enormous advantage. The location already carried supernatural weight. Balete trees have long been associated with spirits and the boundary between ordinary human space and something older. So the ghost didn't have to build a haunted setting. She moved into one, and that leaves you with an impossible choice. You can look in the mirror and risk seeing her, or you can refuse to look, which means spending the entire drive wondering if somebody is sitting behind you. Number 11, the Sigbin, the thing that walks backward. The Sigbin sounds like somebody combined several animals in a dark room and assembled the final creature facing the wrong direction. Imagine something roughly goat-like. No horns, powerful hind legs, huge bat-like ears, a long whip-like almost prehensile tail, a hairless or leathery charcoal gray body stretched over a skeletal frame, and it walks backward with its head lowered between its hind legs. Picture that silhouette crossing a provincial highway right in front of your headlights. Your brain would need a few seconds just to decide which end of the animal you're looking at. Those few seconds are the problem. The Sigbin appears in Visayan folklore in a bunch of different forms. Some stories say its enormous ears can clap together. Some give it a foul, putrid smell that arrives before the creature. Not ideal when one of your supernatural abilities is supposed to be stealth. Some describe it as almost kangaroo, like in the way it moves. And some versions claim it can turn completely invisible. So we now have an animal that walks backward, looks anatomically wrong, smells terrible, and may also disappear. Not a creature designed for good public relations. It's often associated with nighttime hunting and, in some traditions, Holy Week. And some versions of that Holy Week story get much nastier. In those tellings, the Sigbin isn't simply wandering around after dark. It's specifically hunting children. The creature kills them, takes their hearts, and those hearts are supposedly used to make powerful amulets. That's not a universal Sigbin story, and with a creature this regional, I wouldn't pretend it is. But it shows just how wildly the same monster can mutate from one community to another. In one story, it's a bizarre nocturnal animal. In another, it's somebody's supernatural source of wealth. And in another, it's collecting human hearts during Holy Week. Same name, completely different nightmare. But the most interesting part of the Sigbin story isn't what the creature does in the forest. It's who supposedly owns one. Some legends claim wealthy or powerful families secretly keep a Sigbin hidden inside the house. Maybe in a jar, maybe in an earthen container tucked away in a back room. And the creature brings wealth. But it needs maintenance. Some stories say it eats charcoal during the day. Some say blood. Some say the owner must release it at night or feed it according to a specific ritual to maintain the bargain. Where that blood comes from is left disturbingly open, which changes the entire story. Now this isn't just a beast in the dark, it's your neighbor. A family suddenly buys another piece of land, new truck, bigger house, money appearing faster than everybody thinks it should. Hard work is possible, luck is possible, inheritance is possible. But those are boring explanations. A backward walking demon in a clay jar hidden behind their kitchen, that spreads. The Sigbin gives envy a supernatural vocabulary. People don't just say, I don't trust that family. They say, there's something in their house, and that can create real social consequences. Rumors about people supposedly owning creatures like this can produce arguments, accusations, and serious tension inside a community. Rural livestock deaths are sometimes blamed on Sigbin-like creatures. A goat is found injured. Chickens die. Somebody claims the blood is gone. A watch group forms. A few frightened villagers start patrolling after dark. Someone sees a strange silhouette moving backward into the brush, then the rumor becomes evidence for itself. The animal doesn't have to exist physically for the suspicion to become real, and that may be the most dangerous thing about it. Number 10. The Tiyanak, the baby in the trees. You're walking down a rural road at night. Then you hear an infant crying. It's coming from the tree line. You stop. The crying continues. And every instinct you have points in one direction. Go help. That is exactly the problem. The Tiyanak is a small, childlike creature that imitates the cry of an abandoned baby. It waits for somebody compassionate enough to follow the sound. You move through the trees. You find what looks like an infant, maybe wrapped in cloth, maybe lying beside the path. You pick it up, and for one brief moment, you think you saved somebody. Then the weight shifts. The proportions go wrong. The face changes, the mouth opens, and what looked like a helpless child becomes an ancient, twisted little creature with razor-sharp teeth and a wrinkled face no baby should ever have. Some versions even give it a high-pitched adult cackle after the reveal, which is cruel in a very specific way, because I think the Tiyanak is one of the most psychologically disturbing monsters in this entire video. You don't get attacked for being greedy. You don't get attacked because you broke a rule. You don't get attacked because you arrogantly entered a forbidden place. You get attacked because you heard a baby crying and you went to help. The monster hijacks empathy. That's the mechanism. Traditional protections vary. Iron appears in some versions, reflecting wider traditions in which iron repels or harms supernatural beings. And yes, turning your shirt inside out shows up again. At this point, if you are planning a supernatural road trip through the Philippines, just buy reversible clothing. Save yourself some time. The origins of the Tiyanak also shift. Some later Catholic-influenced traditions connect it with infants who died before baptism. That fits into enormous historical fears surrounding infant mortality, religious rites, and what happened to children who died before receiving them. Older folk belief and later colonial Catholic theology mixed in complicated ways, so it's dangerous to pretend every version came from one source. Other traditions treat the creature more simply as a demon, choosing the most effective disguise possible. Either way, the story understands one thing extremely well. There are sounds human beings are almost incapable of ignoring. A crying baby is near the top of that list, which is probably one reason the Tiyanak also works as such an effective warning. In several provinces, older generations have used Tiyanak stories to discourage children and young adults from wandering toward ravines, forests, or lonely roads after dark. Don't wander into the ravine. Don't follow strange noises deep into the forest. Don't let an emotional reaction drag you into a place you can't safely leave. The Tiyanak doesn't overpower your body first, it overpowers your judgment. Number 9, the Berberoka when the river empties. A fisherman walks down to the river and finds it gone. Not low, gone. The riverbed is exposed. Fish are everywhere, hundreds of them, flopping helplessly in the mud, free food, best day of his life. He steps down into the riverbed. That's the mistake. The Berberoka is a water creature associated with northern Luzon, and its trap is beautifully simple. It removes the water. In one version, the creature drinks an enormous amount of it. The water level falls. Fish are stranded. People rush down to collect them. Then the Berberoka releases everything. The water comes roaring back. And in some tellings, it doesn't just flow, it churns and spins. Heavy boots lose their grip, people are knocked down into muddy water and dragged toward the deeper current. The dry riverbed becomes a trap, and the victims are swept away or pulled into the depths. The story does not spend much time explaining how a monster stores literal tons of river water inside itself. Apparently, that was not the part anybody needed clarified. Other versions solve the storage problem differently. Instead of drinking the water, the Berberoka grows huge and blocks the channel. Its body becomes a living dam. The downstream side dries out, people walk in, then the creature simply moves. The water returns, same trap, different plumbing. Some stories make the bait even more deliberate. The Berberoka may appear as an old fisherman or helpless traveler on the opposite bank, waving somebody closer, and the natural danger underneath the legend is very real. Mountain rivers can change terrifyingly fast. Heavy rain miles upstream can send a wall of water down a channel, even if the sky directly above you looks fine. Limestone terrain can hide underground routes, sinkholes, cave networks, and subterranean channels that cause water levels to behave in ways that seem impossible when you can't see what's happening beneath your feet. A dry riverbed can become dangerous in seconds, so folklore gives that unpredictability a mouth. The Berberoka turns sudden bounty into suspicion. Free fish everywhere, the whole river mysteriously gone, maybe wait a minute before climbing into the middle of it. When nature offers something much too easily, ask why. So far, you still had a fighting chance. Don't follow the light. Don't answer the crying baby. Don't trust a river suddenly giving away free fish. You can survive the wilderness if you know the rules. The next 3 don't care how careful you are outside, because they're already inside. 1 waits beside your bed, 1 sits at the dinner table, and 1 only needs to reach your front door. Number 8, the Batibat, the weight on your chest. You wake up, your body doesn't, you can see the ceiling, you can hear the street outside, you know you're awake, you tell your arm to move, nothing happens. Then the pressure starts. Something is sitting on your chest. You may know this experience as sleep paralysis. Some of you have probably experienced it. But imagine waking up like that in a house where everybody already knows the name of the thing pressing down on you. The Batibat comes from Ilocano folklore. She's often described as an enormous, heavy female spirit connected with old trees. Some versions specifically associate her with hardwood trees such as Nara or Malave. In the story, she lives inside the tree itself. Then somebody cuts the tree down, uses the timber as a house post, and the Batibat comes with it, which is a great horror premise all by itself. You thought you removed the dangerous thing from the forest. Instead, you built your bedroom out of it. The forest spirit is now inside the house, waiting for whoever sleeps nearby. At night, she climbs onto the victim. The person wakes, can't move, can't properly scream, feels crushing pressure on the chest. Maybe sees something in the room, maybe directly on top of them. Traditional advice is surprisingly practical. Wiggle a toe, move 1 finger, bite your thumb, do something tiny enough that you might actually be able to accomplish it. Some versions also warn that if the person sleeping beside you starts making strange choking noises or gasping, wake them immediately, because they may not be able to call for help. And this is where the Batibat becomes much more than a monster story. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, physicians and public health researchers in the United States, including investigators connected to the Centers for Disease Control, documented a disturbing cluster of sudden unexplained nighttime deaths among otherwise healthy Southeast Asian refugees. The phenomenon became associated with what was called sudden unexplained nocturnal death syndrome. Autopsies initially struggled to provide satisfying answers. The communities experiencing those deaths already had cultural explanations for terrifying nighttime experiences. Among Filipinos, the term Bungisngis became closely associated with terrifying sleep and sudden nighttime death. Other Southeast Asian communities had their own names and supernatural frameworks. Modern medicine has since connected at least some sudden nocturnal deaths in Southeast Asian populations with dangerous cardiac rhythm disorders and genetic conditions. Extreme stress may also matter. Sleep paralysis itself is a different phenomenon, and it shouldn't be casually treated as the cause of those deaths. But subjectively, it can produce an eerily similar nightmare. Your body won't move. Your vocal cords don't cooperate. Your chest feels compressed. Breathing feels strange. Your brain may still be partially generating dream imagery, and a presence appears in the room, something watching, something standing beside the bed, something sitting directly on top of you. That combination is astonishingly effective without any mythology at all. The experience already feels supernatural. The Batibat simply gives it a face, and people all over the world describe similar sleep paralysis encounters. Different countries, different monsters, different names. The body keeps telling the same story. Number 7. The Tambal, the one that came back wrong. This one gets under my skin more than almost anything else in the video. It goes like this. Somebody you love walks into the forest and doesn't come back. One day passes, then another. People search, nothing, then finally, they return. They walk through the front door. They look right. They know everybody's name. They sit down at the table. They eat. They laugh at the right moments. They sleep in their old room. Everything should be fine. And somehow, it isn't. The Tambal is a doppelganger, like being described in folklore from places including Samar, Leyte, and some other Philippine regions. It doesn't simply resemble the missing person, it replaces them. Well enough to live inside the family, days pass, maybe weeks, then the replacement begins to weaken. A fever, a strange illness, its energy seems to drain away. No healer can fix it. Eventually, it dies. The family mourns. They bury the person they believe they lost. Then later, if that grave is opened, there may be no body inside, only wood, a decaying tree trunk, a stump. Something that was never human. Some tellings connect the replacement to Encanto or other nature beings, almost as though the forest has manufactured a temporary substitute. A few versions even turn it into a cruel test. How well do you really know your own family? Personally, I feel like there are less traumatic ways to find that out. And yes, remember the tree trunk trick, because Philippine folklore uses the idea of wood replacing a human body more than once. But the worst part of the Tambal story is not the thing inside the grave, it's what happened to the real person. Because in some tellings, they're still alive, still in the forest, walking in circles, hidden, held somewhere by spirits, waiting for somebody to recognize that the person who came home wasn't actually them, which means the horror isn't simply a monster got into the house. It's that while everyone at the dinner table was passing food to the thing wearing their son's face, their actual son may still have been outside, alive, waiting to be recognized. And if nobody notices, the family eventually buries the fake. The search ends, the village moves on. The real person disappears twice. First physically, then from everybody's hope, and that supernatural story maps disturbingly well onto a very real human experience. Dense tropical forests are dangerous places to disappear. Search and rescue cases can involve people surviving for days, sometimes longer, on rainwater, whatever food they can find, and pure stubbornness. A missing person can return dehydrated, injured, feverish, exhausted, delirious, or in profound psychological shock. Then they come home. They look physically recognizable, but they act different. They don't laugh at the same things. They stare at the wall. They forget conversations. They wake up screaming. They don't seem emotionally present. Today, you might think about trauma, post-traumatic stress, dissociation, neurological injury, fever, sleep deprivation. But imagine a community with no medical or psychological vocabulary for any of those things. The person who came home looks like your son, but he doesn't feel like your son. And your culture already has a story about people being replaced in the forest. Maybe the forest gave back the wrong one. Suddenly, the legend becomes a way to process something emotionally unbearable. The body came home, but the person you remember didn't. Number 6, the Kumakatok, the ones who knock. 3 figures stand outside a house at night. One appears to be a young woman. Beside her are 2 older men. All 3 wear dark cloaks. Nobody sees them coming up the road. Nobody hears footsteps. They're simply there. Then one of them knocks. the Kumakatok. Literally, the ones who knock. They aren't usually described as attackers. They're an omen. If they knock on your house, someone inside may soon become gravely ill or die. Opening the door doesn't save you. Ignoring them doesn't necessarily save you. The knock itself is the message. It's already been delivered. Some versions make the encounter even worse. The first knocks are loud, at the gate, then they move closer, the front door, then quieter, closer again, until it sounds as if someone is tapping directly on the wall or wood outside your bedroom. You rush to the door, throw it open, nothing, empty street, no footprints, nobody walking away, not even a group of supernatural Christmas carolers sprinting around the corner, just silence. And now everybody inside the house has to wait. Stories about the Kumakatok became especially frightening during epidemics and periods of widespread disease. Retellings often connect the legend with eras scarred by cholera, smallpox, and later the influenza pandemic of 1918. That makes complete sense. Disease is terrifying even when you understand germs. Imagine an outbreak before people fully understand why one family gets devastated and the house next door doesn't. One person gets sick, then another. Death appears random, invisible, unfair. Folklore turns that invisible process into visitors. 3 figures, a door, a knock, something you can picture. Some stories describe families painting white crosses on doors as protection. The image echoes wider religious traditions about marking homes so death or disaster passes by. In some accounts, the mark effectively tells the mysterious visitors, "This house has already been claimed. Keep moving." Whether that practice directly came from one biblical story, a local tradition, or a mixture of ideas is hard to pin down, but the psychology is obvious. People needed something to do, paint the door, mark the house, create a boundary. Anything feels better than waiting helplessly. The Kumakatok turns invisible contagion into somebody standing on your front step, which might make death easier to imagine, but definitely not easier to sleep through. Here's where the video crosses a line. Up to now, we've mostly been talking about what people believed monsters could do. Now we reach the point where those beliefs start affecting what real people do to each other. And once that happens, the creature doesn't have to be real anymore. The consequences already are. Act 4, the neighbor. Number 5, the Amomongo, the one that made the news. It's June of 2008. La Castellana, a town at the foot of Mount Canlaon in Negros Occidental. Something is frightening the community. Animals start turning up dead, goats, chickens, livestock reportedly torn open or disemboweled. And according to contemporary reports, this wasn't 1 or 2 animals. The number was said to be more than 50. Then 2 local men were injured in separate incidents. Reports identified them as Elias Galvez and Salvador Aguilar. Both were reportedly treated at a local emergency clinic for deep scratches and slashing injuries. And they described what they believed attacked them. Hairy, ape-like, long claws. The creature became known locally as the Amomongo. Now this is important. That does not mean a supernatural ape man was proven to exist. It means real people reported injuries, real animals were dying, and local authorities had to respond to real fear. Police took incident reports. The mayor's office became involved. Local officials treated the situation seriously because regardless of what the creature was, something was happening. One practical theory raised at the time was that deforestation or habitat disturbance around Mount Canlaon had pushed an ordinary wild animal closer to human settlements. Residents were advised to be careful. Stories say some villagers began staying indoors after dark. Watchmen patrolled. The sugarcane fields and surrounding brush became places people did not want to enter alone. At that point, the Amomongo had crossed into something different from a traditional monster story. This was the making of a modern cryptid. One particularly dramatic report involved a local resident named Eric. According to the account, he encountered a strange, hairy creature at night and attacked it with a bolo. The animal escaped into the brush before anybody could produce a body and identify it conclusively. There were even reports that police collected blood or biological material connected with the incident. I wasn't able to find a clear, published result that neatly settles what those samples were. And this is the part where the story almost becomes too perfect. A frightened village, more than 50 dead animals. 2 injured men, a mysterious ape-like creature, a nighttime machete fight, blood evidence, and the body disappears into the jungle. If you wrote that scene into a horror movie, somebody would tell you to calm down. But panic changes how people see things. A dog glimpsed for half a second gets bigger, a civet gets stranger, a monkey looks more human, a shadow becomes upright, a person moving through brush becomes hairy. That doesn't mean witnesses are necessarily lying. It means adrenaline is terrible at taking measurements. And there's another human factor. If an entire village is already talking about an ape man, the person who announces, "I fought it with a machete and survived," has immediately placed themselves directly in the center of the story. I'm sure absolutely nobody has ever enjoyed that kind kind of attention. Officials and residents floated ordinary explanations. A monkey, a displaced animal, something affected by habitat loss. Some reports and rumors even entertained more exotic possibilities, including an escaped captive animal. You'll occasionally see later retellings mention everything from a rabid monkey to an escaped chimpanzee. But no supernatural ape-man was ever established, and that uncertainty is precisely why the Amomongo remains interesting. It sits directly on the line, old monster stories on one side, a real cluster of frightening events on the other, and in the middle, something nobody confidently identified. That's how cryptids are born, not necessarily from nothing, from a gap. Something happened, nobody knows exactly what. The story moves in. Now watch what happens when the same process stops pointing at an animal and starts pointing at your neighbor. Number 4, the Aswang, the monster with no single face. Ask 10 Filipinos what an Aswang is, and you may get 10 different answers. Vampire, witch, ghoul, shapeshifter, black dog, wild pig, huge bird, something that eats corpses, something that drinks blood, something completely human until the sun goes down. That's because Aswang isn't necessarily one creature. It's an umbrella, a category containing multiple supernatural beings that change from province to province and island to island. And that ambiguity is the entire point. You cannot memorize one shape and know what to avoid. By day, an Aswang may look completely ordinary. A farmer, a quiet neighbor, somebody working in the field, someone you saw at the market that morning. Then night comes, and the story changes. Remember that clicking from the beginning? Tick, 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 or sometimes walk, walk. The sound seems to come from the roof, or the trees, or somewhere just outside the light. And once again, the rules are backward. Loud means far, faint means close. The noise is not useful information. It sabotages the sense you would normally rely on in the dark. And apparently your ears aren't the only sense you can't completely trust. Some Aswang traditions give you a test for the human disguise. Look directly into the person's eyes. According to certain witch Aswang stories, your reflection in their eyes appears upside down, which raises a practical problem. If you're wrong, you've just spent 15 seconds staring directly into your neighbor's pupils because you suspected they were a flesh-eating witch. There is no socially graceful exit from that conversation. But that's what makes these detection rules so interesting. The creature looks normal, so folklore gives ordinary people tiny defects to search for. And because Aswang is a category, the creature comes in multiple forms. You have blood drinkers, quiet, human-looking, sometimes described as unusually attractive. Instead of classic European vampire fangs, some stories give them a thin, needle-like tongue, or proboscis, that pierces the victim and feeds while they sleep. Basically, a supernatural mosquito with significantly better public relations. Then there are werebeasts like Aswang, often portrayed as men who transform into enormous animals at night. Black dogs, boars, cats, birds, whatever predator fits the local imagination. Unlike the quieter blood drinker, these versions attack physically. They tear, they maul, they hunt dark roads, livestock, or people sleeping inside vulnerable houses. Then you have corpse eaters. One example is the balbal. It targets fresh graves, digs up the dead, devours the body, and then, in some versions, replaces the missing corpse with a banana trunk disguised to resemble the person. And there it is again, wood replacing a human body. The tambal leaves wood in the grave. The balbal puts wood there on purpose. Different creature, same disturbing solution. And while we're talking about corpse eaters, there's one creature I need to mention here, the Berberoka, not because it's definitely an Aswang. It isn't, but it feels very adjacent. Treat this as a little bonus entry if you will. The Berberoka comes from a separate tradition associated with Cagayan Sulu, the island now known as Maypun, far to the southwest, and almost everything people now know about it comes from one extremely strange account published in 1896, which is important, because this is less, here is a creature every Filipino tradition agrees on, and more. Here is one historical report that became impossible to forget. According to that account, Berbalangs looked human, mostly. The giveaway was the eyes. Their pupils were narrow slits like a cat's, and they supposedly needed human flesh badly enough that when corpses were available, they dug open graves and ate the entrails. So, yes, very ghoul-like. But when there weren't enough bodies, the story gets much stranger. A Berbelang would supposedly hide its physical body in tall grass, hold its breath, fall into a trance, and send an astral version of itself out hunting. That spirit could fly into somebody's house, enter the victim's body, and feed on their entrails from the inside, which is already enough. But then I found the detail that made me stop. Remember the Aswang clicking from the beginning? Loud means far away. Quiet means close. The Berbelang does the exact same thing, except instead of clicking, it moans. From far away, the wailing sounds loud. Then, as the creature approaches, the sound gets weaker and weaker until the moan is almost gone. That's when you start hearing wings and seeing reddish lights moving through the dark like fireflies. The 1896 account takes the reversal even further. If the sound and lights appear to be in front of you, you're warned to strike behind you, because Berbelangs supposedly go by contraries. They aren't where your senses tell you they are. The traditional defenses are equally specific: a kris rubbed with lime juice, fresh lime juice sprinkled over graves, or, best of all, a rare coconut pearl said to protect its finder from attack. So, I'm not counting the Berbelang as another Aswang, but it belongs here for one reason. We started this entire video with a monster that lies to your ears. Apparently, it wasn't the only one. Now, back to the Aswang. There are also witchcraft traditions that get pulled into conversations about the Aswang. The Mangkukulam associated with kulam uses harmful magic, curses, illness, swelling, objects supposedly appearing inside a victim, hair, stones, insects. Sometimes stories include venomous familiars or creatures sent to torment the target, a sickness with an enemy behind it. And depending on the tradition, becoming an Aswang isn't always something a person chooses. Sometimes it gets passed to you. Some Visayan stories treat Aswang power almost like an infection or inheritance. A dying Aswang may be unable to die peacefully until the thing inside them has been transferred to somebody else. And one of the strangest versions describes that power as a small black chick living inside the body. When the old Aswang is dying, the creature passes from one mouth into another. The new host inherits the hunger along with it. Other traditions describe something more like a supernatural germ incubating inside the stomach. The person becomes restless. Their appetite changes, and gradually, something about them stops being human. Again, that's not one universal origin story for the Aswang. There probably isn't one, but I love what this version does to the fear. Now, the monster isn't simply hereditary, and it isn't simply hiding among people. It can be handed down. The thing inside one person survives by moving into the next, and the category keeps expanding because the Philippines itself is geographically fractured. Different islands, different communities, different languages, different histories, different mutations of the same basic fear. There's one province that gets connected to the Aswang constantly, Capiz, on Panay. The association is so strong that people from Capiz still get asked about Aswangs as if the province has a supernatural tourism board. It's a running joke, and also not entirely a joke. But here's where the legend stops being fun. Aswang accusations have not always stayed inside stories. Real people have been labeled monsters, often women, widows, healers, outsiders, the elderly, the poor, people who were visibly ill, people already on the edge of the community. During the Spanish colonial period, Catholic authorities documented indigenous spiritual traditions extensively, and native ritual specialists were often interpreted through a religious framework that cast them as dangerous, demonic, or heretical. Colonial authorities wanted indigenous spiritual power brought under their control. That does not mean Spanish friars invented the Aswang. The belief is older and far more complicated than that. But colonial power changed how indigenous beliefs were categorized, recorded, condemned, and sometimes punished. And once your culture already has a word for the dangerous person hiding among us, that word can be pointed at somebody. There's even a modern medical connection worth handling carefully. Panay has a notable concentration of X-linked dystonia Parkinsonism, a real hereditary neurological condition that can cause severe involuntary movements and abnormal postures. That disease did not create the Aswang myth. The folklore is much older, but researchers studying stigma point to the larger human problem. When somebody's body behaves in a way other people don't understand, the community may reach for an explanation it already has. The person is not a monster, but the story is sitting there, waiting to be pointed at them. There are real families living with illnesses like this, and whatever the Aswang started as, the word eventually became something people could use to make a neighbor into a monster, which is exactly why what happened next could work at all. The time the CIA used the Aswang as a weapon. Alright, this is the one I teased at the beginning. When I started researching this video, I absolutely did not expect to end up here. But once you find this story, you cannot leave it out. The year is the early 1950s. The Philippines has barely emerged from a devastating world war and is already deep inside another conflict. The Hukbalahap movement, commonly shortened to the Hooks, is fighting an armed insurgency against the Philippine government. Deep in the mountains and rice-growing regions of central Luzon, guerrilla units are fighting forces loyal to the government. The countryside is tense, violent, political, complicated. And into this situation steps an American officer named Edward Lansdale. Lansdale is a genuinely strange figure in Cold War history. Former advertising executive, United States Air Force officer, closely tied to American intelligence operations. And one of his central beliefs about psychological warfare was simple. You don't only beat somebody by shooting at them. You study what they believe, what frightens them, what rumors travel, what symbols carry weight, what stories they already know. Then you use those. According to Lansdale's later account, his team needed a huck position cleared from a strategic hill. Taking it directly could mean a costly fight, so instead of immediately attacking, they staged a story. First came the rumor. Word began moving through the communities below the position that an Aswang had taken up residence near that specific hill. Not a giant announcement, not some ridiculous government poster reading, "Warning, vampire," just gossip, quietly, people talking, market stalls, villagers, huck sympathizers. A story traveling the way stories actually travel. Then they waited. 2 nights. That detail is incredible. 2 full nights, deliberately allowing the rumor to climb the hill on its own, because you can't force a superstition into someone's head in 5 minutes. You let somebody hear it in town, they tell somebody who knows one of the fighters, that person tells somebody else. By the time the story reaches the camp, it doesn't feel like enemy propaganda, it feels like something everybody has already heard. Then came the physical part. According to Lansdale, his psychological warfare unit waited along a trail used by a huck patrol. The group passed. They silently grabbed the last man in line. The fighters ahead kept walking. Nobody immediately realized somebody was missing. Then they staged the body. According to Lansdale's account, the captured fighter was killed. 2 puncture wounds were placed in the neck. The body was hung upside down by the heels and drained of blood. Then it was left along the trail, where the guerrillas would eventually find it. The patrol came back looking for their missing man, and there he was, bloodless, 2 wounds at the throat, on the exact trail where people had spent 2 nights whispering that an Aswang was hunting. According to Lansdale, the guerrillas abandoned the hill. No huge artillery barrage, no dramatic assault. Not 1 shot needed to take that position in the story Lansdale later told. The rumor did the work first. The corpse completed the story. Now, quick folklore purist complaint. 2 neat holes in the neck sound a lot more Dracula than many traditional Aswang feeding methods. Some Philippine blood drinker stories describe a long tongue or proboscis rather than classic vampire bite marks. So if Lansdale's account is accurate, his unit may have been taking some creative liberties. A mosquito-like puncture probably doesn't communicate vampire attack as cleanly as 2 obvious holes in the throat. So I understand the decision, but still, where is the commitment to realism? Now we need to be extremely careful here, because almost every detailed retelling of this operation ultimately owes a great deal to Lansdale himself. He later described the episode in his memoir. And Lansdale had plenty of incentive to present his career as a series of brilliantly engineered psychological victories. He was not an objective security camera. Historians also make it very clear that the Huck Rebellion was not defeated because one American pulled an Aswang stunt on one hill. The wider conflict involved military reform, political changes, land issues, intelligence, government legitimacy, a huge number of factors. So did this happen exactly frame by frame, the way Lansdale later described it? We cannot know that with complete confidence. But the story is not merely some fringe internet invention either. It has been repeated and discussed in serious historical treatments of Cold War psychological warfare, including later books about Lansdale and American intervention in Southeast Asia. Writers including Vincent Bevins and Scott Anderson have discussed the episode, and investigative reporting has revisited it with historians and folklorists. Lansdale was also operating inside a broader American intelligence network, rather than simply freelancing alone in the jungle. And the broader principle fits his documented style perfectly. Study local beliefs, understand the emotional terrain, use the cultural system that is already there, and that is the core thing that matters. A foreign intelligence apparatus looked at folklore and saw infrastructure, not entertainment, not decoration, infrastructure. These stories were load-bearing. They already existed inside the emotional landscape. Nobody had to invent the fear, they just had to pull on it. That's why I keep coming back to this line. Lansdale didn't have to create fear from scratch. He just rented one that had already been running in those communities for generations. And that might be the darkest demonstration of the whole thesis of this video. A folk belief can become culturally embedded enough that somebody with enough power can attempt to turn it into a weapon system. Lansdale later carried similar psychological ideas into Vietnam. American psychological operations there experimented with recordings designed to resemble the voices of restless dead, attempting to exploit local beliefs around improper burial and wandering spirits. The recordings were broadcast into the darkness, a dead voice supposedly warning living soldiers to abandon the fight. On paper, it sounds like the exact same trick. Use supernatural fear, make the enemy leave, but the results were far more mixed, because folklore is not a universal cheat code. You can't just press ghost and expect every person on Earth to panic. The story has to belong to the person hearing it. It has to fit the exact belief, the ritual, the culture, the emotional logic. It has to already live somewhere inside them. And that brings us back to the Aswang, because we left one major member of that family unfinished, its most famous relative, and in my opinion, one of the most visually horrifying creatures in mythology anywhere. Number 3, the Manananggal, the half that flies. By day, the Manananggal can look completely ordinary. A woman in the village, someone you passed on the road, somebody who looked perfectly normal at the market that morning. Then night comes, and she does something no other creature in this video does quite the same way. She disassembles. At dusk, the Manananggal finds somewhere private, tall grass, a banana grove, a place outside the village where nobody should be watching. Then, the body separates at the waist. The lower half stays behind, legs, hips, and exposed waist. And the upper half grows enormous bat-like wings and takes off into the dark. And exposed waist is actually putting this pretty politely. In many descriptions, the viscera are still hanging from the flying upper body. Intestines, organs, everything trailing beneath the torso while the wings carry it over the village, which makes the silhouette even worse. At a distance, maybe you think you're looking at some enormous bat. Then it passes over the roof, and you realize the thing hanging underneath it isn't a tail. The name is connected to tanggal, to remove or detach, which is exactly what you're looking at. Most monsters transform. This one comes apart like the human body was built from Lego, and once airborne, she hunts. The stories are very specific about her preferred prey, pregnant women. According to many versions, the Manananggal lands on the roof above a sleeping victim, then extends a long, narrow, hollow tongue through gaps in the thatch. The tongue feeds on the fetus, blood, or bodily fluids, while the mother sleeps below. It's one of the most horrific images in Philippine folklore. But splitting yourself in half creates an extremely obvious problem. You have left half of yourself somewhere else, and the lower body can't defend itself. It's just standing there, blind, motionless, completely vulnerable. So if somebody finds it while the upper half is away, the entire hunt reverses. Traditional protections vary: salt, garlic, ash, vinegar, chili, sometimes other spices. Basically, if you find a supernatural torso in the forest, raid the pantry, chef's choice. The point is to put something on the exposed waist that prevents the two halves from reconnecting. And once you do that, the Manananggal has a deadline, sunrise. If she can't find her lower half and reconnect before the first light hits, she dies, which gives this legend one of my favorite reversals in mythology. For most of the night, the Manananggal is the hunter. She's above the village, everybody below is vulnerable, but somewhere underneath her, somebody may already be moving through the banana trees, looking for the legs. The moment they find them, the entire story flips. Now the monster is racing home, now she has the clock, now she's the vulnerable one. Her greatest advantage and her fatal weakness are the exact same act. Splitting her body is what gives her freedom, and splitting her body is what can kill her. The obsession with pregnant women also reflects very old fears: miscarriage, infant mortality, complications during pregnancy, the terrifying reality that a pregnancy can suddenly go wrong for reasons nobody around the family understands. Before modern medicine could explain many of those losses, folklore could. Something came in the night, something fed through the roof, something stole the child before it could be born. That explanation is horrifying, but an explanation still gives shape to grief. And as with the broader Aswang tradition, accusations have sometimes landed on real women. Female healers, outsiders, women whose behavior neighbors distrusted, people already vulnerable to exclusion. That resembles witch traditions in many parts of the world. Something awful happens. A baby dies. Someone becomes sick. A pregnancy ends. And eventually somebody asks, who did this? Folklore offers an answer, sometimes far too easily. Historical accounts of Aswang accusations include people interpreting strange lights, noises on roofs, unusual behavior, and unexplained illnesses as evidence that a particular person was involved. And even into the modern era, supposed Manananggal sightings have produced waves of neighborhood fear. Somebody reports wings, someone hears tapping. Another person says they heard the tick-tick. Soon everyone is standing outside with flashlights, bolos, salt, garlic, and whatever else they think might help. The creature may never have to appear. Once enough, people believe something is above the houses. Nobody sleeps anyway. That's the ground covered. Forest, road, house, village. The monster started outside, then they moved closer until one could wear your neighbor's face. The final two aren't interested in any of that. They don't hide in trees, they wait above the entire world, and when they attack, the sky disappears. Number 2, the Minakawa, the bird that eats the moon. Somewhere beyond the ordinary world, there is a bird large enough to eat the moon. That sentence already sounds ridiculous. The traditional description makes it better. The Minakawa comes from Bagobo mythology in Mindanao, and it is not just a normal bird scaled up. This is a cosmic predator. Eyes like mirrors, a beak and claws described as metallic or steel-like, feathers as sharp as blades. Some traditional descriptions get unbelievably metal about this creature. Its nest can be imagined in a distant abyss or otherworldly place built around copper, blades, and sharp metallic surfaces that mirror the bird itself. And the creature is enormous. Not eagle carrying away a goat, enormous. Not dragon blocking the sun, enormous. Moon in one bite, enormous. That's what an eclipse could become inside the story. The moon isn't passing through Earth's shadow. A bird got hold of it and put it in its mouth. Imagine watching that before modern astronomy. No telescope, no orbital diagram, no science teacher with a flashlight and 2 foam balls. The moon simply starts disappearing, so the village reacts. Shouting, drums, gongs, pots, anything loud. The goal is to startle the Minakawa, make it look down, make it open its beak, make it drop the moon. And I love the logic of this, because faced with the sky going out, the response isn't to hide. It's everybody outside. Right now, make as much noise as you physically can. One person screaming at a cosmic bird is a guy having an episode. An entire village doing it together is a ritual, and from their perspective, it works every single time, because the moon always comes back. Cosmic predators swallowing the sun or moon appear across many cultures, and the pattern is especially interesting across maritime Southeast Asia, where different communities in the Philippines and neighboring regions developed their own serpents, dragons, birds, and monsters that attack celestial bodies. The creature changes, the fear underneath it doesn't. The sky is supposed to be reliable. The moon is supposed to stay there. Then one night, part of it disappears. Human beings hate broken patterns, so mythology gives the violation a predator. And some Minakawa stories push the threat even farther. The moon is only the beginning. The bird wants the sun too. And if it ever managed to swallow both, the world goes dark. Humanity itself could be next. Which sounds like a perfectly reasonable number 1. But it isn't, because the last creature does something the Minakawa doesn't. It gives humanity a job. Number 1, the Bakunawa, the serpent that ate the rest. Look at the moon tonight. 1 moon, that's it. But according to one famous Visayan tradition, there used to be 7 moons hanging in the sky, bright enough to transform the night, and something in the sea became obsessed with them, the Bakunawa, a colossal serpent, a dragon in many modern depictions, something big enough to rise out of the ocean and take a moon in its jaws. One by one, it swallowed them. 6 disappear, only 1 remains, and eventually the Bakunawa comes back for that one too. At first, this sounds extremely similar to the Minakawa. Both creatures can explain an eclipse, both swallow a celestial body, both inspire villages to make noise. So why is Bakunawa number 1? Because in some versions of the Bakunawa story, something changes. Divine intervention preserves the final moon, the surviving moon is protected or marked, and humans are given a role. In one especially vivid version, a creator deity places bamboo on or across the surviving moon. Those markings become an explanation for the dark patches visible on its surface. Then humans are given an assignment. When the serpent comes back, you defend the moon. That is the difference. The eclipse is no longer only a mystery happening above you. It becomes a standing obligation between humans and the sky. The Bakunawa rises, the moon begins disappearing, and everybody knows the assignment. Get outside, bang pots, beat drums, strike the ground, shout into the darkness, make enough noise that the serpent releases what it stole. They aren't just observing an eclipse, they're participating in a rescue, and every single time the moon reappears, the ritual seems to prove itself. We scared it away. We did our job. Some versions say the Bakunawa became obsessed with the beauty of the moons. Others frame the creature through jealousy, rage, love, divine conflict. Some stories transform its identity even further, a goddess, a being connected to the moon, even, in certain later retellings, something like a sister or celestial relative whose relationship with the moon has gone catastrophically wrong. The details move depending on who tells the story, but the central image survives. A serpent large enough to coil around the world, a mouth wide enough to eat the moon, bamboo marking the last survivor in the sky, and below it, an entire village standing outside with cooking pots, and somehow, the humans are not powerless. That is why the Bakunawa belongs at number 1. The Minakawa is a cosmic predator. The Bakunawa is a cosmic predator that turns humanity into part of the mechanism. The story gives you responsibility. The moon survives because you participated, and once you notice that, the entire video starts looking different. Look at the shape of what we just walked through. We started on a dark road outside a village. Then we moved into forests, rivers, bedrooms, houses, communities, and finally, all the way to the edge of the sky. And underneath almost every monster was something recognizably real. The Tikbalang is the terror of getting lost when all the terrain looks the same. The Berberoka is a river behaving in a way you don't understand until it's too late. The Batibat is the horror of waking up inside a body that refuses to move. The Tambal is the fear that somebody you love can come home physically unchanged and somehow feel like a completely different person. The Aswang is social suspicion given teeth. the Minokawa, and the Bakunawa are the sky going dark without warning or explanation. Even some of the stranger ones are doing something. The Nuno turns respect for the ground under your feet into a social rule. The Kapre makes an ancient tree feel occupied rather than empty. The Tiyanak turns the sound you're least capable of ignoring into a warning about where compassion can lead you. The Sigbin turns envy and unexplained wealth into a creature hidden in somebody else's house. The Kumakatok gives invisible disease 3 bodies and puts them on your doorstep. These stories took the parts of life that felt completely outside human control and gave people an action anyway. Turn your shirt inside out. Say, tabi tabi po. Don't follow the light. Don't step into the empty river. Wake the person choking in their sleep. Find the lower half. Pack the waist with salt. Paint the door. Respect the tree. Go outside and bang on a pot until the dragon gives the moon back. Every monster on this list arrives with a manual for survival. That is not decoration. That may be the entire function, because human beings are terrible at accepting chaos. We hate the idea that something horrible can happen for no reason, and there's nothing we can do about it. A monster changes that, because monsters have habits. Monsters have weaknesses, monsters have rules, and if something has rules, maybe you can survive it, which is exactly why the Edward Lansdale story matters so much. Whatever details of that operation were polished, exaggerated, or mythologized in later retellings, the central idea is still unsettling. A military intelligence officer looked at a supernatural belief and recognized behavioral power. He didn't have to build the fear, it was already there. Parents told children, neighbors told neighbors, villages carried the stories forward. He walked into a landscape wired with generations of cultural infrastructure and pulled one specific lever. That's when folklore stops looking like decoration. It becomes infrastructure. These aren't just fairy tales, they're maps. Maps for dangerous terrain, unexplained illnesses, grief, social suspicion, strange weather, dark roads, a loved one who comes home changed, a tree you should probably leave alone, a mound you should step around, a river that suddenly doesn't look right, a sound you should not follow, a knock you desperately do not want to hear, a moon that needs defending. And sometimes, unfortunately, they're maps for deciding who the monster is. That's the thing I didn't expect when I started researching this. I thought I was making a video about weird creatures, but the creatures might actually be the least interesting part. The interesting part is why people needed them. A cold historical fact tells you what happened. A monster makes damn sure you never forget why it mattered. And if you grew up with a completely different version of one of these, a stranger Sigbin, a different Aswang, another Tikbalang rule, a Bakunawa story I completely missed, something your grandparents swore was true, put it in the comments, because half these creatures change shape every 50 kilometers, and honestly, that might be the best part. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.